Have you ever asked yourself if the reason you started learning a language is the same reason you continued learning that language? It's a question that a year of consistent learning was able to answer for me and sheds light on how important a strong why is in staying consistent. 안녕하세요, 여러분. I've held that one in my arsenal for a while, just waiting for the right opportunity to release it into the world. If my Korean hurts your ears, I apologize, but I have to practice and get better at it somehow. I can, however, assure you that I won't be subjecting you to my Korean in the rest of this video. Without reason. I've been doing a lot of reflection on the past year. It's just one of those things that comes with starting a new year, so I wanted to throw my journey as a language learner into the mix in hopes that what I've learned thus far will inform my goals going forward. I've also been feeling a little lost in my language learning, or maybe stuck is the right word, and I need some inspiration. For a little bit of background, my first language is English, and I did learn a little bit of French growing up, but it's almost like it never happened because I can barely remember any of it from lack of use. The languages I am currently learning are Japanese and Korean, and I developed an interest in learning both languages as most weebs and K-pop fans do. I started watching anime as a kid, but manga was what really tipped my interest towards learning Japanese because I thought that would make it easy for me to read all my favorite series without waiting for translations. What a joke. I had a similar experience with the Korean language. My exposure was through Korean dramas, partly due to the drama adaptation of a manga, which was Itazura na Kiss, but K-pop was what made me develop an interest in the language. I am a sing-along type of girl, and I wanted to be able to jam out to my favorite K-pop songs, either by myself or at a concert. I'm also a huge lover of power ballads and OSTs, and I wanted to be able to sing these songs without invoking a curse on myself. At the point in my life when I started consuming most of these types of content, they were for pure entertainment, and a part of me always saw them as something I'd eventually outgrow because they were mostly viewed as childish interests by society at large. I am, however, now in my late 20s and fully confident in my interests enough to know that they genuinely bring me joy, so I started to seriously consider language learning again. In the initial phases of my consideration, I was very intimidated by the Japanese writing system, and that significantly reduced my effort to learn the language, but Hangul was my saving grace and what gave me that necessary nudge. It was advertised as a super consistent and fairly easy to learn writing system that was possible to learn in only 90 minutes. I'm not gonna lie, I thought that was a load of crap, and not being one to shy away from an opportunity to test the validity of that statement, I decided to take the challenge and found out it was a pretty valid statement. You really can learn Hangul in 90 minutes. This was back in 2020 when the world was stuck at home and in desperate need of ways to entertain themselves without being outside. I started learning Korean casually and inconsistently, but later moved to actively learning the language in 2023. I'm the type to take the plunge without thinking too hard when I've decided to do something, so I found really affordable tutoring on Amazing Talker and booked some lessons. In hindsight, that was a pretty bold move for someone with my limited knowledge of the language beyond exposure to dramas and K-pop. I honestly don't know what my intent was at the time I booked those lessons, but I did get something out of them. They showed me the gaps in my understanding of the language, and that helped me to curate a learning plan that I stuck with for the most part of the year. Probably because I was doing a lot of language learning based research at the time, I came across an ad for affordable tutoring lessons where you could pick your tutor after a trial session. I figured I had nothing to lose, so I gave it a try and chose a tutor who shared similar interests in K-pop and Korean dramas. And I think she did an amazing job. She used my interest in both topics to make our lessons fun and engaging. She occasionally spoke to me in Korean and encouraged me to do the same. And from our fourth session onwards, all the presentation materials for our sessions were in Korean only. So that meant I had to read frequently. And while I knew basic vocabulary and grammar rules for simple conversation, there were still a lot of words I was unfamiliar with. I was comfortable with simple sentences, but once they started to get longer and more complicated, that just induced a headache. Reading was probably the most painful part. I could recognize the characters and read them out. There were still so many steps between seeing the words and making sense of them that made my comprehension slow. It looked something like this. I'd read out what I saw first. 내 이름은 소피아. 15살 웃음이 너무 많은 소녀이다. Then repeat the sentence after making sense of the characters I was seeing and matching them to their correct sound. 내 이름은 소피아. 15살 웃음이 너무 많은 소녀이다. Only then could I move towards comprehension, which was another 2 steps, because I always had to translate to English to fully comprehend what I was reading. By the time I completed the 10 sessions I paid for with my tutor, the gaps in my learning were clear. I didn't know enough vocabulary to form full sentences. I was pretty okay with grammar rules but could get better, armed with an arsenal of vocabulary. Reading, speaking, and comprehension were by far my weakest points, which was to be expected given my status as a beginner. With the awareness of these gaps, I created a learning plan to help me improve in the aspects I found my knowledge to be lacking. And this is what it looked like. For the first part, which was vocabulary, I used my first 500 Korean words and topic to learn new words in a structured format, but I also learned a lot of words naturally through immersion. I also think one thing my first 500 Korean words does better than trying to memorize words from the topic guide is the fact that there is a story to go with each set of 10 words you learn, so there is a context to the words and that makes it easier to remember them. For grammar, I mainly used Talk to Me in Korean. The basic membership was free at the time. A really convenient aspect of it was also the fact that all the lessons were already created and I just had to show up. So I'd study the lessons on my own and listen to the audio on my drive to and from work. I finished the 3rd level before it became a paid service for all memberships, which I think is just enough to kickstart your learning. For reading, I am an avid reader, so I have access to some resources that are provided as part of my Kindle Unlimited membership. More recently, I've also been using the Webtoon Korea app since being able to read webtoons is a huge motivation for me. My reading material is also what I use for speaking practice. I'd read out loud sometimes and even record myself to track my progress.
아빠는 한국에서 태어나서 중국 학교 때 미국으로 건너왔다. 뉴욕에서 엔지니어로 일하는.
Similarly, I read to improve my comprehension. My comprehension isn't always 100%. I can't even say it's at 75% most times, but I read to immerse myself in the language, get exposed to new words, see how they are used grammatically, and overall to get used to seeing the Hangul characters. The last part of my learning plan was immersion through input, which was the easiest part. I basically used content I was already consuming and made the switch from casually enjoying them to making my input more active. And the goal here wasn't necessarily to understand, but to get more familiar with hearing the language. I'd also occasionally practice my speaking and intonation by shadowing the speakers as well. That was what my learning plan looked like, and I stuck with it for about 5 months. As my confidence in language learning grew, I decided to slowly start adding Japanese on a trial basis at first to see how well I could adapt to learning 2 languages, and by the end of the year, I was actively learning both languages. My learning started on a high in 2023, but like I mentioned earlier, I started to feel lost at some point and didn't meet a lot of my learning goals. However, the fact that learning Korean gave me the confidence to start learning a language that used to make me feel intimidated is such an amazing achievement, and that's what I choose to focus on. With Korean, I think I felt lost in how to go about learning it because I already covered most of the basics enough to start trying to explore a little bit outside of that range. The basic beginner level felt comfortable, and new things that confounded me weren't constantly thrown at me, so it felt nice, but it was no longer challenging. So this year, I'll try to work on getting out of that comfort zone while still using the framework of my learning plan from last year. But I'll be replacing the Talk to Me in Korean lessons with textbooks. I have chosen the Korean Grammar in Use and Vitamin Korean textbooks. I'll stick with using them for the next couple of months and see if they're providing enough of a challenge to boost my learning. As for Japanese, although I've gotten a lot of exposure to the language from years of being a weeb, I am still a beginner. I want to get more familiar with the kana system and be able to automatically recognize the characters on sight. I have been writing out the lyrics of my favorite anime openings and endings in kana to help with that. I'd love to start slowly adding kanji at some point this year, learn more grammar, vocabulary, pitch accent, and pretty much the same learning plan for Korean, with immersion through input, reading, and shadowing. There are a lot of free resources for learning Japanese, so I'll be using those for now before purchasing any textbooks. Going back to my statement at the beginning of the video and how having a strong why is important for staying consistent. I know for a fact that if my only reason for learning both these languages was to watch anime, read manga, and sing along to K-pop songs, that alone would not keep me consistent. I have a 9-to-5 job and several other hobbies that consume quite a bit of time. I can read English subtitles for anime, wait for English translations of my favorite manga, and just vibe to K-pop songs without fully understanding what's being said. Language learning is, however, something I've grown to enjoy in the past year, and it has become more of a hobby that I partake in because I want to. The added benefit of being able to read and understand them are very welcome bonuses that really enhance my status as a fangirl. But ultimately, I just fell in love with the little wins I've been able to celebrate. Connecting with other cultures, being able to read characters that used to look like a bunch of gibberish to me, not having to read subtitles all the time, understanding the jokes that don't translate as well in English.
저희 하겠습니다. 하나, 둘, 셋. Brainstorming. 호랑인가요?
And of course, increasing my brain power. I still have a long way to go in becoming fluent in both languages, but this video is a way of documenting my progress in the past year, and it's also meant to serve as a form of accountability. I've put out what I hope to achieve into the world, and I'm excited for what the year will bring. That brings this video to an end. Whatever day you find yourself watching this, make it a great one. Mata ne.
先生は任務で里の外に出てんのか。そうかそうか。行け、玉吉。行け、玉吉。
口寄せの術。
口寄せの術。